Did you know that nearly 10% of football players who've competed in the World Cup have played for a country that they were not born in? Well, it's that time again, and it is time for the FIFA Men's World Cup. That kicked off in Qatar, or Qatar, depending on how you want to pronounce it, in November of 2022. So in this video, we're going to look a little bit at nationality and immigration with regard to playing soccer or football for different national teams, and specifically looking at this year's World Cup. So my name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. So a lot of the information I'm going to be using in this video today is from an article that was published by the Migration Policy Institute and written by Gijsbert Oonk, who is working at the Erasmus University Rotterdam, who's done a lot more work on international football and nationality changing. But of course, have a look at the description here for other references in case you're interested in looking more at this topic. So let's start with looking at Qatar, a country that actually has a lot of national team players that weren't born in Qatar. There were some first waves and ripples with this Sudanese-born Almoez Ali, who is actually playing for the Qatar national team. Now, his mother was born in Qatar, which made him eligible for playing in the country, but he also has other teammates like the Portuguese-born center back Pedro Miguel, who actually has no prior connections to Qatar. So as I mentioned before, Qatar is actually a team that has a lot of people born in other countries. So we have Sudan, Portugal, but also Algeria and Iraq, just to name a few. So it's not completely clear how some of the members of the national team actually gained their citizenship, because in Qatar, as in many other Gulf countries, it's extremely difficult to get nationality. But what we're seeing in many Gulf countries, and definitely in Qatar, is that there's an easier path to citizenship and nationality for, different sports players. So international athletics, having players from different nationality origins and switching nationalities is actually not new. If you're interested in this, you can check out more on some of our Olympic videos from the last Olympics. You can also look at the most recent US Open, where we also look at immigrant tennis players and possibly some switching of nationalities, but also second generation tennis players. As I've mentioned, nearly 10% of players in previous World Cups have actually competed for countries in which they were not born. Now, players actually born in another country than the national team that they've played for in different FIFA World Cups actually began in around 1930, and we've seen quite a difference in the percentage of players that have actually done this, from something around 4% to maybe upwards of 13%. But nowadays, I would say in the most recent World Cups, we're definitely anywhere between 8% to 12% of players that were actually born in another country than the country that they are playing for. So historically, it's really not uncommon for players to represent countries other than the ones in which they were born. So we've seen this quite a lot. In many cases, they're actually competing for countries that were historically connected to their country of birth. So, things like formal colonial powers or friendly states or neighbors, or countries that they have some kind of degree of cultural similarity or language similarities. And countries where maybe it was easier for them to access citizenship, particularly countries also where people might have dual nationality because maybe their parents were from different countries. So we've seen this quite a lot. On the Qatari national team, for example, most players that were born in another country were normally born in North Africa or the Middle East and are native Arabic speakers and Muslim. So those are also quite some shared qualities that they have. Now, over time, players' countries of birth have become more diverse, although of course there are quite large differences between countries. So the United States, for example, has often historically selected players who were born abroad, and that's in quite stark contrast to Brazil, who generally has not had any immigrant players on the national team, at least playing in the World Cup. Now, in the 2018 FIFA World Cup, we can look at a country also like Morocco that had 17 out of of their 23 players that were born outside of the country. Now, if we also look at France's World Cup 1998 team, 9 members of that team were either immigrants or children of immigrants. And when the French team won, also 2 decades later, the squad actually carried 17 immigrants or children of immigrants, and all but 2 of these were actually from African descent. Now, how is nationality often given or awarded? So nationality is most typically achieved either by birthplace or by descent through parents, and this is called jus solis and jus sanguinis. So jus solis is based on the place of birth, and jus sanguinis is based basically on parents or grandparents, so through heritage. And some countries have a mix of both, and some countries rely more on one than the other. Now, international sports competitions, are often based around citizenship, and countries are usually playing for countries where they were born and then have nationality. But there are also different rules for granting citizenship, and sometimes these are stretched quite a bit, or nationality rules or being able to switch nationalities has become easier for people from an international sports background. And now that can often be an issue of contention. Now, of course, some players have already multiple nationalities and can kind of cherry pick which teams make the most sense for them to be able to represent. So for example, in Europe, you have a lot of powerhouse European football or soccer teams where it can be very hard to make the national team. So sometimes people with multiple nationalities might choose to play for a non-European team because they have a better chance of making that national team. And those national teams, for example, in Morocco or another African country, could really use their skills, and they would make a difference for that team. So you can see where players can also cherry pick which nationalities they play for. But there also are rules around nationality with regard to who you can play for in international competitions, and that's made things a little bit tricky also with regard to being able to switch teams that you play for. So FIFA last updated its eligibility rules in 2020, allowing athletes with multiple nationalities to switch national teams only once, as long as they have not played in more than 3 matches for the previous team. The rules also allow players over the age of 18 who have lived in a country for multiple years, so this is 3 years if they've moved there under the age of 10 and 5 years if they've moved later, to play for its national team. So what we've actually seen is that sometimes countries have lobbied FIFA to change certain rules or relax certain rules. So we saw that, African nations lobbied FIFA on 3 different occasions in 2004, 2009, and most recently in 2017 to get eligibility rules changed so that they could actually recruit a lot of players in their diaspora. What we've seen is that there have been, plenty of really great African players that were born in France or Spain or England who would play for those youth national teams, but then weren't quite good enough to play for, these really strong powerhouse teams at the World Cups, but they're still good enough to make a real impact with African national teams. So what does this mean for the future? What are we likely to see in the future? I think what we're likely to see is countries trying to recruit from the diaspora more and more. We're probably likely to see countries like Qatar opening up citizenship or nationality, making it easier for players to switch to join their national teams. But we really don't know what the future holds. So I guess we'll have to keep a lookout for that, and definitely make sure that we keep having a look at what's going on in the World Cup and where the players are coming from and who's making a difference. So if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the videos that we upload every week on different migration issues. And I definitely hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.